a half-finished bottle of schnapps, tobacco still sitting in a soldier's pipe, boots lined up by the door as if someone was about to put them on. For 63 years, this bunker had been waiting, sealed under 30 feet of Danish sand, forgotten by the world above, frozen in time like some kind of concrete tomb. And then, in the spring of 2008, a violent storm ripped across the North Sea. Waves crashed against the dunes with fury that hadn't been seen in decades. The kind of storm that reshapes coastlines. The kind that reveals what should have stayed buried. When the storm cleared, the beach at Huvik had changed forever. Stay with me until the end, because what they found inside these walls tells a story that history books forgot to write. A story of young soldiers, of desperate times, and of secrets that refused to stay hidden. It started with two boys, 9 years old, on a summer holiday with their parents along the western coast of Denmark. The kind of trip where kids run free on empty beaches, looking for seashells and building sandcastles while their parents read books under umbrellas. But these boys found something else, a bucket, rusted, sitting half buried in the sand where the storm had torn away the dunes. It looked old, ancient even, the kind of thing that shouldn't be there. They dug a little deeper, their small hands pushing away wet sand. And that's when they saw it. The edge of something massive, concrete and iron emerging from the earth like the bones of some ancient creature. Gray walls disappearing into darkness. A steel door partially visible, crusted with rust. The boys ran to tell their parents. Their parents called the authorities. Word spread through the small coastal community like wildfire, and within hours, the quiet beach at Huvik was crawling with archaeologists, historians, police officers, and one very determined electrician named Tommy Casso. Casso had been fascinated by bunkers since childhood. He knew that 7,000 of them lined Denmark's western shores. Built by Nazi Germany during World War II as part of Hitler's Atlantic Wall. A massive defensive line stretching from Norway all the way to the Spanish border. The largest military construction project of the 20th century. Over 600,000 workers built the Atlantic Wall. German soldiers, prisoners of war, forced laborers from occupied countries. They poured millions of tons of concrete. They embedded hundreds of thousands of tons of steel. They built gun emplacements, radar towers, observation posts, and living quarters designed to withstand anything the Allies could throw at them. The bunkers followed strict German engineering standards called the Regelbau system. Over 600 approved designs, each one precisely documented. Armored doors 30mm thick, air intakes with steel grates, ventilation systems with gas filters, emergency exits, telephone connections, heating vents, everything standardized, everything efficient, everything built to last. Hitler called it an impenetrable wall. German propaganda showed newsreels of bristling guns and elite troops. The reality was different. Many positions were manned by soldiers too old or too young to fight on the Eastern Front, men recovering from wounds, boys not yet out of their teens. But the concrete was real, and the concrete survived. Most of these bunkers had been emptied decades ago, stripped of anything valuable, left as hollow concrete shells for tourists to photograph and teenagers to drink beer inside. But these bunkers, the ones emerging from the sand at Huvik, these were different. Casso grabbed his flashlight and crawled through a tunnel of sand that partially blocked the entrance. The space was tight, claustrophobic. He could feel the weight of 60 years pressing down on him. His heart was pounding. He had no idea what he was about to see. If this story is already giving you chills, hit that subscribe button, because I promise you, we haven't even gotten to the disturbing part yet. The steel door scraped against concrete as Casso pushed it open. The sound echoed in the darkness. The air inside was cold, stale, untouched for more than 6 decades. And then his flashlight swept across the room. Time had stopped. Beds were still made, gray wool blankets tucked neatly under mattresses. Chairs were tucked under tables. A communication system sat ready for a message that would never come. Wires ran along the ceiling, still connected to equipment that had been waiting 60 years for power. Boots, socks, undergarments, all laid out as if the soldiers were about to return any moment. In the corner, a small heater, the kind designed to keep 10 men barely warm in a concrete box. Next to it, a vial containing medication in case of a mustard gas attack, a precaution against a weapon that was never used. And on the table, untouched since 1945, a half-finished bottle of schnapps. Cassot would later describe the feeling to reporters. It was like entering the heart of a pyramid with mummies all around. I dug through the sand blocking the entrance, and what I saw blew me away. It was as if the German soldiers had left only yesterday. But they hadn't left yesterday. They left on May 10, 1945, 2 days after Germany surrendered. Historical records tell us that one of the last soldiers stationed at this bunker was a 17-year-old named Gerhard Saalfeld. Just a boy, really. He had arrived in January of 1945, when the war was already lost, but no one was allowed to say it out loud. Saalfeld was part of a garrison defending a remote stretch of coastline against an Allied invasion that would never come to Denmark's shores. By 1945, the real fighting was happening elsewhere, in the forests of Germany, in the ruins of Berlin, in places where boys his age were dying by the thousands. But Saalfeld and his fellow soldiers were stuck here, waiting, watching an empty sea. For 4 months they lived in this cramped space, 20 square meters, about the floor. Size of a small studio apartment. 10 men sharing bunks, breathing recycled air, staring at concrete walls painted white to make the space feel less suffocating. The daily life of soldiers manning the Atlantic Wall was often monotonous and stressful. They were constantly on high alert for a possible Allied attack, causing mental strain and anxiety. The living conditions in the bunkers were harsh and uncomfortable. Space was tight, with barely 1 square meter per soldier. They had a sleeping place and a stool. The commanding officer had a chair. Signs on the walls warned them in German, "Walls have ears." Lights out when embrasures are open. They waited for orders. They waited for the war to end. They waited for something, anything, to break the monotony of their frozen existence. Some of them painted murals on the walls, landscapes of home, faces of loved ones they might never see again. Small acts of humanity in a place designed for killing. And when the surrender finally came, they simply walked away. Saalfeld and his comrades shut the steel doors behind them, walked 10 miles to the nearest town, and surrendered to the Danish authorities. They never looked back. Within weeks, the shifting dunes had begun their slow burial. Sand piled against the doors, covered the ventilation shafts, sealed the bunkers in a cocoon of silence. And there they remained, through the Cold War, through the fall of the Berlin Wall, through the turn of a new millennium. 63 years of darkness, until that storm. The discovery created a media sensation. Bent Anthonysen, Denmark's leading expert on Atlantic Wall fortifications, declared the find unique in Europe. 4 bunkers, completely furnished, completely intact, a time capsule from the final months of World War II. Thousands of tourists flooded the normally quiet beach. German families drove across the border to see where their grandfathers might have served. Danish historians called it the find of a lifetime. In a way, this discovery can be compared to Tutankhamun's tomb almost a century ago, one local resident told reporters. It has to be preserved. To blow up the bunkers, as some have suggested, would be like denying that World War II ever existed. Archaeologists worked around the clock to catalog everything they found. Rusty cans of food, the labels long since rotted away. Electrical cables still connected to equipment. A plastic vial containing medication for mustard gas exposure. Nazi pennants, assorted weaponry. Radar equipment that had once tracked Allied planes across the North Sea. And then there were the personal items, the things that turned Nazi soldiers from faceless enemies into human beings. 4 stamps featuring Hitler's image and the German eagle, unused. The German curator at the Olgott Museum, Gert Niebrich, examined them carefully. He determined they had been intended for sending Christmas presents home in 1944. The presents? Packets of Danish butter, small comforts from an occupied land, sent by homesick boys to families they hadn't seen in years. We don't expect contemporary objects like these to be so well preserved, Nebrich told reporters. Maybe it's because they were kept for 60 years in the cold and dark, like in a big vacuum. A half-finished bottle of schnapps, perhaps saved for a celebration that never came. Tobacco in a pipe, set down one day and never picked up again. If this is the kind of history that fascinates you, do me a favor and hit the like button. It helps this channel grow, and it tells me you want more stories like this one. But the bunkers on the Danish coast were just the beginning. Across Europe, the ground has been giving up its secrets, and not all of them are as peaceful as abandoned schnapps bottles. In 2020, researchers uncovered hidden Nazi bunkers near the D-Day beaches of Normandy. These structures had been buried since 1944. Part of the Mazy Battery, one of the largest German defensive positions in the landing zone used by American forces on June 6, 1944. Josh Gates, host of the television show Expedition Unknown, was among the first to enter. We discovered huge Nazi bunkers that haven't seen the light of day in 75 years, Gates told reporters. We were able to dig down and reveal the doors and go inside them. They are frozen in time. There are artifacts inside there. Gas masks, ammunition, Nazi helmets, all sitting exactly where they had been dropped when American Army Rangers stormed the position during some of the bloodiest fighting of D-Day. Evidence on the ceiling suggested the bunker had been burned, either during the firefight to capture the site or in the desperate hours afterward when wounded men tried to survive in the darkness. It's a strange feeling entering a place like that, Gates admitted. It's exciting. On the other hand, it's a somber, dark experience. This was a place that housed Nazi soldiers, men who were trying to kill Americans on that beach. The Mazy Battery had been deliberately hidden from history. While everyone knows about Point du Hoc, the famous clifftop position that Army Rangers scaled on D-Day, the Mazy Battery was kept secret. The German Army built it in total secrecy while letting the world know about Point du Hoc, a decoy, a distraction. And for 75 years, the real fortress lay buried under French farmland. But the discoveries weren't limited to Western Europe. In the frozen reaches of the Russian Arctic, scientists stumbled upon something even more unexpected in 2016, a secret Nazi weather station on the remote island of Alexandraland. Few people knew the Germans had ever set foot this far north. But in October 1943, a U-boat crew had erected an automatic weather station in the desolate landscape. The Germans desperately needed weather data. The Allies had stations in Greenland, Iceland, and across North America. This gave them a crucial advantage in predicting conditions for military operations. So the Nazis sent men to one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. The Russian scientists found a station decades later, discovered German mines, hand grenade fragments, cartridge boxes, ammunition for Mauser 98 rifles, feed belts for MG-34 machine guns, and clothing, parts of uniforms, overcoats, underwear, socks, pieces of footwear. The men who wore these items had been stationed at the edge of the world, fighting a secret war that most people never knew existed, a war for weather data, a war fought in absolute isolation, where the enemy wasn't Allied soldiers, but the Arctic itself. But perhaps no discovery has been more disturbing than what happened in Poland, the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's secret headquarters on the Eastern Front. This wasn't just a bunker, it was a hidden city. Nearly 200 buildings spread across 6.5 square kilometers of dense Polish forest. 50 bunkers, 70 barracks, 2 airfields, a railway station, a power plant, all connected by kilometers of roads, all camouflaged to be invisible from the air. The compound was surrounded by 3 security zones. The innermost zone, Sperrkreis 1, protected Hitler's personal bunker with 2-meter-thick walls of steel-reinforced concrete. The only armed guards allowed near him were members of the SS Begleitkommando des Führers. They never surrendered their weapons. They were never searched. 36 million Reichsmarks were spent on construction. In today's money, that would be hundreds of millions of dollars. All to create a fortress where Hitler could wage war in complete safety while millions died on his orders. This compound served as the Nazi command center from 1941 to 1944. Hitler himself spent over 800 days here, more time than he spent anywhere else during the entire war. This was where Operation Barbarossa was launched, the invasion of the Soviet Union that would kill millions. This was where genocide was planned, where the Holocaust was administered from behind concrete walls. And this was the site of the famous assassination attempt by Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg on July 20, 1944. The bomb that nearly killed Hitler, the conspiracy that failed and cost its participants their lives. After the war, the Soviets captured the Wolf's Lair, but they didn't want it preserved. They didn't want it becoming a shrine for Nazi sympathizers, so they tried to destroy it. In late January 1945, demolition teams planted explosives throughout the compound. The blasts were massive, but the bunkers had been built to withstand Allied bombing. Walls 2 meters thick, steel-reinforced concrete designed to survive direct hits. Many structures survived. The Soviets tried again in December 1947. They failed. East Germany tried demolition in 1959. They failed too. The Wolf's Lair refused to die. For decades, the site sat in Soviet-controlled territory, off-limits to Western researchers, slowly being reclaimed by the Polish forest. Trees grew through the ruins. Moss covered the concrete. Nature tried to erase what man had built. It wasn't until 1990, after the fall of communism, that the Wolf's Lair opened to the public. Today, it draws over 200,000 visitors annually. People walk among the ruins, touch the concrete walls where Hitler planned genocide, but no one knew what was still buried beneath the surface. In February 2024, members of the Le Tibre Foundation were conducting an archaeological excavation beneath the ruins of Hermann Göring's personal residence at the Wolf's Lair. Göring had been the commander of the Luftwaffe, second in command of the entire Third Reich, a man who lived in obscene luxury while millions starved and died. Engineer Adrian Kostreva was digging through debris when his shovel struck something hard. He thought it was a pipe, plumbing from the old house perhaps. It wasn't. It was a human skull. And it wasn't alone. Further excavation revealed 5 bodies buried in a line. 3 adults, a teenager, a newborn baby, all missing their hands and feet. The sight shocked us, one of the investigators told reporters. Initially, we thought they were animal bones. We weren't sure what we were dealing with until a delicate skull emerged. The bodies were arranged together, facing the same direction. No clothing, no personal effects, just bones and burned boards and the remains of old sewage pipes. You'd never expect such things in such a place, Le Tibre member Dominik Markiewicz told Reuters. It was the most guarded place in the Third Reich, and after the war the Russians took over. Everyone wondered what might have happened there. We tried to think of something, but nothing reasonable comes to mind. Were they victims of the Nazis? Executed prisoners? Forced laborers who knew too much? Or did something happen after the war, when the Soviets controlled the site and no one was watching? The medical examiner concluded that the bodies appear to date from the interwar years, between 1918 and 1939, before the Wolf's Lair was even built. This meant they could have been buried there before the Nazis ever arrived. But that raised an even more disturbing question. The skeletons were buried just a few inches below the surface, right next to 1940s-era plumbing pipes. If they had been there when construction began, the workers would have found them and left them where they were, which means someone knew. Some investigators pointed to the presence of dart-shaped stones called belemnites near the bodies. In some cultures, these fossils were placed at burial sites as good luck charms, or used in ritualistic contexts. Were they some occult rituals of Third Reich fanatics? Markievicz wondered. We have no idea. The investigation was eventually closed, not enough evidence to determine what happened. The poor condition of the remains made it impossible to establish cause of death. 5 people, buried beneath the home of one of history's greatest monsters. Their identities unknown, their fate uncertain, their story lost to time. This is what lies beneath the surface of World War II. Not just the battles and the treaties, not just the heroes and the villains, but the secrets, the unexplained, the things that got buried and forgotten. In Hamburg, Germany, 3 Nazi submarines sat entombed in an abandoned bunker for 40 years before being rediscovered in the 1980s. The U-boats had been scuttled on Hitler's orders in the final days of the war, part of Operation Regenbogen. Sealed inside a concrete tomb called Elbe II, forgotten by everyone except a handful of shipyard workers who never told anyone what they knew. In Berlin, construction workers have repeatedly stumbled upon Nazi bunkers while building the modern city. Joseph Goebbels' personal shelter was found in 1997. Hitler's SS bodyguard bunker appeared in 1996, complete with Nazi wall murals painted by men who pledged their lives to protect a madman. Even Hitler's own Führer bunker remained largely intact for decades. The bunker where he married Eva Braun. The bunker where he shot himself as Soviet shells fell on Berlin. The Soviets tried to blow it up. They damaged some walls, but sections survived until 1988, when construction crews building new housing accidentally broke through. Today, the site of Hitler's final refuge is marked only by an information board in a parking lot. German authorities deliberately avoided creating any kind of memorial. They didn't want to give neo-Nazis a place to gather. But the bunker is still down there, somewhere beneath the apartment buildings and the supermarkets of modern Berlin, waiting. The Atlantic Wall alone contained over 6,000 bunkers along the Danish coastline, 15,000 more across the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. Many of them are still there, sinking into beaches, emerging from sand dunes, collapsing into the sea. Some have been turned into museums, others into homes. One couple in Guernsey recently discovered a Nazi bunker under their house and plans to convert it into a games room. But most sit abandoned, covered in graffiti, slowly being reclaimed by nature. World War II and its memories will not just go away, a Danish newspaper wrote after the Huvik discovery. And discoveries like these breathe new life into the story and the fascination that still surrounds this war. 80 years after the guns fell silent, we're still finding what they left behind, and we're still trying to understand what it means. If you've made it this far, you're not just watching a video. You're part of a community that cares about real history, the kind that isn't always comfortable, the kind that raises more questions than it answers. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, I bring you stories like this one, hidden chapters from the past that deserve to be remembered. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think happened to those 5 bodies at the Wolf's Lair? Was it something from before the war, Nazi occultism, Soviet crimes that got covered up, or something we haven't even considered? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Next time, I'm going to tell you about the soldier who refused to kill a single person in World War II, and then saved 75 men in a single night. His commanders called him a coward. The army almost threw him in prison. History calls him a hero. Until then.